Hello, and welcome to this week's Stickerific edition of Zilog and Moto. Stickerific? Man, these intros are getting worse. Anyway, if you're a returning viewer of the channel, I'm glad you're back, especially after that last bit. And if you're a new visitor to the channel, let me go over the basics real quick. My name is Dave, and this is my channel. Everything you see on Zilog and Moto is created 100% by me. Well, I mean, except for the games, the music, the pictures. You know, maybe we should leave percentages out of it. I mean, who needs math, am I right? Back to the channel though, I've got a goal of creating a repository that has detailed reviews of every English language game for the Sega Master System, Genesis/Mega Drive, Sega CD, and 32X that all contain background information about each of the games, a look at the original package including the manual and other things that may have come with them, and finally, game footage captured directly from original hardware. And just to clarify, English language means any region where a game was released that has text that I can read on the screen. So those 150 or so Master System games that weren't released in the United States? Yep, those are on the list, along with international releases for each of those other consoles. By trying to review every game in these libraries, I'm not trying to show favoritism to any of them, so when I pick out a game to play, or experience as the case may be, with some of these titles, calling them a game is a very loose description. I'm just not picking out games that specifically I want to play, or that I think people might want to see because they have a reputation for being awful. It really is a matter of going over everything in the library, good, bad, and in between. Which brings me to this week's video and game, and I'm saying game with very large quotation marks around it, that I honestly did not know existed until I started this collection, due to never having seen it back in the day. A few years ago, I was in the disc replay in Joliet, or Crest Hill if you want to be specific, and by the way, that's a very interesting store. It's a little different than your typical disc replay, in that it's very much a hot mess, and more like shopping at a curated flea market. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's definitely an experience, and if you happen to find yourself in the area and are looking for something unique, check it out. Anyway, that particular store is set up so that all of these Sega games are actually high up on a shelf behind the counter, which kind of makes it a pain in the ass, especially if you're nearsighted like me and you didn't bring your glasses in. But that day, I saw this box that looked very unique as far as the Genesis library goes, and that turned out to be Wacky Worlds Creativity Studio. We'll look closer at the box and what's in it in a second, but you can probably already tell that this is not your average Genesis title. You may remember that Sega previously put out the title Art Alive for the Genesis, and I reviewed it back in episode 92 if you're curious, but to sum it up, it was not a great title at all, even if you remove the fact that it wasn't a game, and it absolutely paled in comparison to the fantastic Mario Paint, which not only featured art capabilities, but also added in some musical features. And it came with a mouse to make it easier to draw things. Have you ever tried drawing with a D-pad? It's not great. So, was Sega able to correct any of those missteps with Wacky Worlds? Or is this a matter of too little and way too late? Well, we shall see, but first a look at this quite large package.
And this is my copy of Wacky Worlds. And despite what I said earlier, I didn't actually pick it up from that disc replay, as that copy had some issues. I don't remember what, like water damage or something, but instead I grabbed this copy from eBay shortly afterwards. If you're curious about how big this box actually is, it's the same height and length as a standard Genesis or Master System title. The box just happens to be wider, with it being just shy of 2 standard games put together. Also, with it being a cardboard box, I do have a plastic protector for it, but with its odd size, I ended up going with a protector that was actually designed for stack up for the NES, due to it also having an oddly oversized box. You might be looking at this and thinking, boy, that copy is a bit beat up, and it is. The cardboard definitely has some wear on the edges, and there's a little bit of dirt on Sonic, and the front especially looks like it's got a bit of sun bleaching to it. But overall, the structural integrity is held up, which is kind of a big deal because unlike other cardboard box releases for these consoles, there's no inner tray here to give the box additional support, so it ends up being incredibly fragile. And honestly, I really didn't care to have a perfect copy of this. I was just looking for one that was decent. So here you go. As far as the front cover goes, you can tell when it was released as it features not just Sonic the Hedgehog, but also Tails in an obvious effort to sell the game, not unlike how Mario was used on the cover of Mario Paint. Even though it's a bit busy, I like the art used here, and it gets right to the heart of the matter with create animated worlds, compose cool music, and what's this? Includes a mouse controller? Yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. Also, it has one of the more useless ESRB ratings on the front. I mean, really, what other rating was this title going to have? Flipping over the back, and you can definitely tell that this was a later release on the console, as these are some fantastic looking screenshots back here, and they take up a good portion of the real estate, with also having an original design. There's some overlapping and angling going on to these shots. Also, each picture shows a different section of the title, and they all have their own customized captions, although a few of them I have to roll my eyes at a little bit. For instance, creating a masterpiece of pictures and music has never been this much fun, or unpredictable. You know, I know what they meant, but unpredictable isn't a selling point for a creation utility. For instance, if Power Director, which is what I use to create these videos, is being unpredictable, I'm probably going to be having a really bad day. One last thing, if you look in the lower left-hand corner, there's some boilerplate about how the game will only work on NTSC Genesis systems, and while it's fairly common in this case, I looked it up, and the game will work on PAL Mega Drives, it just isn't optimized for PAL. And I just figured I'd mention that as the game didn't get a PAL region release, or Japan for that matter. Opening up the box, and before anyone screams, it's not complete, yes, I know I don't have the mouse pad or the poster that originally came with it, but it's got the manual and the mouse at least, and that's all I really cared about. The mouse pad was just a generic red foam pad, so not really missing much there, but the poster did have kind of a cool coloring book side if you're curious. As far as the manual goes, it's actually a surprisingly good manual for this type of game. There's tons of pictures that show each of the scenes that are available, and then there are also how-to guides that are fully illustrated for all of the things that you can do in Wacky Worlds. And honestly, there's apparently a lot more that you can do here than I initially thought, from a customization perspective, so I'm pleasantly surprised by all that. Okay, that's enough about the package. Let's get into Wacky Worlds and get our sticker on. Before I get too far into talking about Wacky Worlds, I should probably talk about the mouse that comes with it. There were technically two mice that were released for the Genesis Mega Drive platform, the Sega mouse, which was released in Japan and Europe, and featured only 2 buttons and a clickable trackball, and then there was the Mega Mouse, which was released in the United States, and is more of a standard ball mouse with 3 buttons for A, B, and C, and then a separate start button. Wacky Worlds included that version of the mouse, which is great, but just to be clear, the mouse was also sold separately, and there are other titles out there that support the mouse, especially certain light gun games that can use it as a separate control method instead of a light gun or a controller. Also, if after watching this video, if you decide you want to play around with Wacky Worlds, you don't have to use the mouse if you don't own one. It's completely functional when using a standard Sega controller, and in fact, all of the video that you're seeing in this segment was recorded with me using a standard 8-bit DOE M30 wireless controller. With the fact that I'm reviewing Wacky Worlds as a follow-up to Art Alive, you might think that Wacky Worlds would serve as a direct sequel to that game, and essentially have all the same features as Art Alive, plus new ones. Well, that's not exactly true, because Wacky Worlds is actually a different type of software title. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but depending on what you're looking for in a creativity suite for kids, you might still not be getting exactly what you're looking for. If you're not familiar with Art Alive, I'll sum it up by saying that it served as purely an art title. Think of Art Alive like perhaps a console version of MS Paint, or maybe Paint Shop Pro, the old computer design title. It had a few pre-outlined backdrops that you could fill in, similar to coloring in a coloring book, and it also had about 50 pieces of clip art that could be dropped into a page wherever you wanted them. However, beyond that, anything that was drawn on the screen was totally up to the person, using the basic drawing tools that were provided. It technically did meet the requirements of being a basic art title, but alive, it was not. And instead it felt incredibly lifeless, and I question why it even existed, aside from possibly serving the market of kids that wanted to draw digitally, but perhaps were in households that couldn't afford a full-blown computer. And while I appreciate the fact that it was a somewhat early release coming out in 1991, and well before Nintendo debuted Mario Paint for the Super Nintendo the next year, it was simply missing features that would have certainly helped it be a much more worthy title, like mouse support, or even simply the ability to save your work, with the back of the package infamously suggesting that people should record their work with a VCR if they wanted to look at it later. Fast forward to late 1994, and Sega had come up with the idea of a line of software aimed squarely at young children, called the Sega Club. This product line would feature games designed for kids from toddlers to early elementary school and consist mainly of edutainment titles. And actually, I've already reviewed one of those games on the channel, covering Sesame Street Counting Cafe all the way back in episode 36. But before Sesame Street Counting Cafe was Wacky Worlds, which Sega picked to be the first Sega Club title. Wisely, Sega looked at what went wrong with Art Alive and what went right, along with Mario Paint in comparison, and decided to go in a slightly different direction. As a result, Wacky Worlds is not a coloring book title, like Art Alive was. Instead, it's a digital sticker book, and I think that's a fantastic idea. Digital drawing titles are fine, and I think they have their place, but let's face it, even a great title like Mario Paint was limited, and regardless of whether you had a mouse to use instead of a controller, to get the best experience, you really needed to be using a home computer, or better yet, dump the digital experience entirely and simply use standard tactile art tools. Okay, so maybe drawing on a console isn't so hot, but what about stickers? Whereas it's arguable that good old pen and paper is better for drawing, physical sticker books can be a bit of a drag. A run-of-the-mill, cheap sticker book will have a bunch of pages of pre-drawn art, and then some stickers that can be pasted in to fill out the picture. But what happens when you decide a certain sticker would look better on a different page? Or perhaps you frustratingly put the sticker down incorrectly, so that it's now in the wrong spot, or worse, wrinkled and torn. Vinyl sticker books solve some of these problems with the ability to move the stickers after they've been placed once, but they're also a bit more expensive, and over time they'll still wear out. Enter the digital sticker book, aka Wacky Worlds. Rather than being a drawing title, Wacky Worlds relies on digital stickers to create art. The setup of the title is that Sonic has a spaceship and can fly to 6 different worlds, each with their own theme. There's Sci-Fi Planet, Fairy Tale Kingdom, Monster Movie, Safari Island, the Toy House, and Under the Sea. Each of the worlds have a few stickers pre-applied when you first visit, and the worlds don't just consist of the first screen that you see, as there's also additional scenery to the right and left, giving you more room to play with. By default, each of the worlds have their own stickers to apply to the scene, themed to fit with the world that you picked. And not just a couple stickers either, as the sticker books for each world will have a few pages to flip through, with each page having multiple stickers to look at. But what if you want to mix things up a bit? Perhaps you want to have an alien visit the mermaids and fishes under the water. Or maybe launch a vampire to the moon. Or maybe your princess wants to take a lion from the jungle as a pet. You can do all those things, as all of the theme sticker books are available for each of the worlds, and you can mix and match as much or as little as you like. Well, within reason anyway, as there is a limit of the number of stickers that you can apply to each world, but it's a decent number, and chances are if you hit that number, your scene may already be a bit cluttered. The creativity doesn't end there, however. I mentioned earlier that Wacky Worlds shouldn't be really considered a drawing title because you aren't drawing and coloring your own art, you're applying stickers. But that's not 100% true. You see, after you place a sticker on the page, you can pull up the sticker editor and change any of the colors present in the sticker. Want to create a red moon instead of the traditional white one? Or perhaps a purple alien instead of a green one? It's as simple as clicking on the color and then on the sticker in the spot that has the color that you want to change. Sure, it doesn't have the customization of a full drawing application, but in the interest of keeping things simple, I think this is a fantastic feature, and I like how it's smart enough to retain the existing shading, or change to a flat color depending on which option you choose. But wait, there is more. What's better than a sticker that you can place on a page, move if you don't like where you put it, and that you can change the color of if you want some variety? Well, what about a sticker that moves on its own? Now, not all of the stickers will move, but some of them, especially the character stickers, will have movements that can be triggered by clicking on them, allowing the player to have an even more fun animated canvas. And those movements can be triggered individually, rather than being an all or nothing scene. While I recognize that it's easy to be dismissive of Wacky Worlds and call it just a sticker book, it's clear that there definitely was some thought put into it. One place that I haven't mentioned just yet that clearly had a lot of care and attention to details is Wacky Worlds' audio system. Now, you might be thinking, audio system? It's a sticker art book. And that is true, but why does it just have to be a sticker art book? Each of the 6 worlds have their own soundtrack, which is nice just on its own, but it goes deeper than that. Each of the soundtracks can be edited via a boombox icon down on the toolbox. When you click on the boombox, you'll be brought to a screen, which frankly was more than a bit overwhelming to me the first time I looked at it, so I can only imagine what it might look like to a kid. However, after a bit of experimenting, it starts to make sense. The game's music is broken up into stickers that each contain a riff. Each riff is played by 4 musicians, and each of the 4 musicians play one of 4 styles of music, designated by color, and which can be mixed and matched however you like. The speed with which all the musicians play can be adjusted, and each musician can either be stopped, in case you want to focus on the other instruments for that piece, or they can be told to jam out, causing them to play a solo instead of their standard riff. The amount of options is pretty crazy, and you can easily spend half an hour just playing and tweaking with one sticker, much less picking out which stickers you're going to include and in which order. Of all the nice options and features that are included in Wacky Worlds, I do have one complaint, and that's the control scheme. When selecting the stickers, you have to choose one of 4 pointers. The default one that's used to just select and move stickers, then the pointer that's used when you want to open up the color editor, then the pointer that's used when you want to remove stickers from the page, and then finally the pointer that's used when you want to activate the animation for a sticker. Basically, every time you want to switch features, you have to go pick out a new pointer from the toolbox at the bottom of the screen. However, the A, B, and C buttons all represent the same mouse clicks. Couldn't they instead have assigned different functions to each button, so that you wouldn't have to always stop what you're doing and open up the toolbox? I get wanting the game to be simple, but I think in this case they went overly simple. And at very least, there should have been an option for if you wanted to switch between maybe a simple versus an advanced control scheme, as it really interrupts the creative flow. I think Sega saw what Nintendo did with Mario Paint, which ended up being probably far more successful than anyone expected for what was essentially an educational tool instead of a game, and decided that they needed to go completely back to the drawing board, pun fully intended, and that's how we got Wacky Worlds in late 1994. Sure, it wasn't a timely response, as it was released almost 2.5 years after Mario Paint, but I still think it's an interesting title and a far better effort than Art Alive was. Despite my minor quibbles with the control scheme, I think the rest of the title is solid and deserving of 3 stars. Just the fact that Sega included battery backup this time around, allowing players to save their worlds, complete with musical arrangements, automatically makes it a better release, but the fact that they went above and beyond that makes Wacky Worlds a quality edutainment title, and something worthy of being the first entry in the Sega Club series.
And that was Wacky Worlds for the Genesis. When I first looked at this title, I'll be honest, I thought, oh, this will be an easy review. There's not a whole lot going on here. I can record some usable game footage pretty quickly and concentrate on the rest of the review. However, what was originally only supposed to be about 15 minutes or so soon turned into well over an hour. And I even had to stop what I was doing and come back and record more footage because I hadn't even touched the music editor yet. Clearly, Wacky Worlds is not going to be for everyone. But I think if you're in the specific target audience for this title, you'll find it very enjoyable, and something that the creative-minded could easily spend hours on. Next time on Zilog and Moto, it's the Midwest Gaming Classic. I hope anyway. I've got a presentation scheduled with the host of the bonus stage at MGC this year, Seth Newman, aka Tiger Chainsaw on YouTube. So ideally, the next video I'll be uploading will be a recording of that presentation for everyone that didn't have the chance to attend this year. This is all assuming that there's no technical difficulties with any of that, as I really haven't used the old camcorder outside the house, so fingers crossed, everybody. Well, that's it for Zilog and Moto episode 192. If you like what you saw here and want to see more, please think about liking and subscribing if you are so inclined, as it will help more people see these videos. But most importantly, whatever you like to play, have fun and be excellent to each other. Later.